Okay, it is 5:30 on Thursday, January 9th, and we'll call the Village of North Hudson Public Safety Meeting to order. Roll call. Trustee Olson,
Here.
Trustee Porter,
Here.
Trustee McGurran, here. Okay. Comments from the floor. This is the opportunity for the Village of North Hudson residents or property or business owners to make the Public Safety Committee aware of topics, issues, or opportunities that are not on tonight's agenda. And we don't have anyone from the public or the community here, so we will move past comments from the floor and go to minute approval. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from the November 14th, 2024 Public Safety Committee meeting?
I move to approve the minutes from November 14th, 2024 Public Safety meeting.
A motion from Trustee Olson. Do we have a second?
A second.
Trustee Porter seconds. Any discussion on the minutes from November 14th?
No.
Hearing no discussion, do we have a vote? Can we have a vote to approve the minutes? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Next item is the police chief's report. Chief Rickert, do you have a report for the committee this evening?
Good evening for our first televised meeting ever for me in 19 years as chief. This will be a little bit different, but no changes really to the information I'm going to provide tonight. I do have a report. The first item that I sent to you is a little bit of old business, some conversation about the municipal court abolition that took place last year and will start to affect us in 2025 as the court will start to wrap up and be done by the end of April of this year. A few changes then for the police department in the procedures and how we or where we send our municipal citations. And so I did have a meeting at the middle part of December with the St. Croix County Clerk of Court's office and a couple of her staff members to discuss what dates will be used for citations. In the past, for our municipal court, we would have one court date a month. Now we will have still have one court date for the most part, but we'll have different times dependent on the type of citation. So I just got back, actually just before this meeting, an email that our court date for all municipal ordinances will be the fourth Wednesday of the month in circuit court. And then we will have an 8:45 time for municipal traffic citations, and then a 10:15 time that we'll put on citations for basically all others. The only exception would be for any juveniles. That'll be on a different day and time. Still, I'm trying to get that nailed down. So we do have that information. The plan is I'm having a staff meeting towards the end of January with my officers and staff. We will, for any violation in February, be writing the citation into circuit court for a March court date. So all citations from February will go to a March court date at the circuit court. That will allow the municipal court some time to collect outstanding fines, those items that are from previous either payment plans or citations, instead of going right up to the deadline and then having to transfer some of those expenses over to the circuit court to collect. In the conversation I had with the clerk of court, she said when other municipalities have done this, that's been best practice so that there is kind of a declining amount coming in for the municipal court, and then the circuit court starts to pick up the pace towards the end of the municipal court's time frame. So that's what I have to report to the committee at this time. The other item that I have on there is that parking citations will now be taken over by the police department, payments made to the police department for those. In the past, there were kind of two ways to do it. A lot of municipalities would have the police department run the parking citations. In the past, we had our parking citations go to the municipal court. But because that's not an option and the circuit court will not take on parking citations, we'll do a little bit of a transition and take payments for parking citations. If the parking citation is contested, then that will be able to go to the circuit court for any contested citation. But we'll run through taking the initial payment, or if they don't pay, sending out notices, sending out the duplication of, where after so many days the fine will double. We're still working on if that's going to be 15 days, 5 days, 10 days, kind of get a feel for that. I'll bring that information back to the committee once we get something nailed down that I would like to move forward with. But we've got a little bit of time on that. Those citations are typically, all parking citations are $20 except for parking in a handicap zone, which is a $50 citation. So kind of on the lower end of what we usually see. Any questions on the municipal court transition? All right, the other items, because there was no December public safety meeting, I did have my office or my administrative assistant put together the two different incident breakdowns, basically what would have been the December report, and then the second one is the one from the December, what would have been the December committee meeting until today. Nothing really out of the ordinary, kind of a typical atmosphere, quite a few EMS calls over the last couple of months. But other than that, we really have not seen any upticks in anything major to report or anything that the community needs to be concerned about.
Chief? Do you know if the animal or the animal calls that are on here also went to the warden, and would we be able to so we could get a report from the warden, or is that just?
I don't believe that they did. I know that I took 2 of them. They were animals at large. We were able to, either they're animal at large, or I also had, from the December to January, I did have an animal bite that occurred, and those are, we had to do a quarantine order on that particular animal, but those, because typically, and I know we're going to be talking about the animal ordinance later on, but typically, because we're present, my officers will take that initial call, and really, unless it's an animal at large where the animal can't be returned or we can't find the owner, that's when the animal warden typically gets called. A lot of times it's because of timeliness. If we have to call him and bring him all the way from Amory or wherever he lives, we're 45 minutes out by the time we call him, get him here. If it's an animal running at large, an officer's going to have a much more, a quicker response to be able to try to get it into a car or get it on a leash, those types of things. So a lot of times the officers will take that initial complaint. And I don't know, I'll have to check to see if my office manager forwarded those, but he would, other than getting a copy of it, he would not have taken, per se, any of those. But if he were here, we could ask him if he had any other calls. But
I thought, Mary, you had asked for a report months ago to start receiving reports from him too.
We wrote it into the proposed ordinance, but and I'm not sure if it's in his contract, so I'll check. I'll loop back with Gina on.
I thought we asked to start getting reports like this monthly from him, just so that way we could start seeing what he was receiving calls for, to update the ordinance and see what we were getting complaints for. But I might be mistaken. That's like 5-6 months ago too.
yeah, and I don't get reports from him on a monthly
Right.
basis, otherwise I would pass them along. So the next item that's listed there is just the overtime expense for 2024 through December. Like I mentioned, we typically budget around $5,000 for overtime, and that could be anywhere from taking a shift, an open shift because somebody took vacation, to taking sick time or a sick shift, court, those types of things, training. And we are under budget because with 4 officers at $5,000, it's a $20,000 budget. We were at about $8,000 or $18,700 for that. So keeping those overtime costs down, or at least within budget. And then the last item that's posted was the written verbal warning citation tallies by officer. So that information is there just to show, that there's been some activity and that we're trying to keep keep up the number of written or verbal warnings, so that we're just trying to educate people and get them to voluntarily comply with the different ordinances or traffic issues. And then obviously those that we feel are too far for a warning, they will receive a citation and follow up with that. So questions on any of that? Otherwise, thus ends the chief's report.
Chief, question.
Yeah.
Are the warnings and citations, do you think, pretty consistent with past years, or do you see any trends or changes?
As far as total numbers, or like how the officers?
Anything that you're seeing that would be like a trend?
So I haven't done a year-end, kind of analysis. I usually do that towards the end of January once kind of everything trickles in. But I can tell you that the officers, because I do individual officer handouts every month, they're within that 66% cite or warnings and 33% citations, kind of that 2 to 1, 2 warnings for every 1 citation. But as far as overall numbers, I couldn't tell you at this time, but I will definitely bring that summary to you I should have that for the February meeting.
Oh, wonderful, thank you. Okay, and the fire chief, Chief Spielman notified myself as the chair that he would not be able to be here tonight, most likely because of a conflict. He did provide a report to the committee. Everybody should have got the report, and it was his November and December combined report with 9 incidents in November and 2 in December. And then the next item is the amend ordinance, Chapter 10, Section 1010, licensing, discussion, and possible action. This is the animal ordinance that we had referenced earlier. And Trustee Olson, you want to do an update on what you've heard from the attorney about the draft?
Yeah, so the questions that I had sent to our attorney specifically outlining for the chickens, we didn't receive any, I did not receive any response for my specific chicken questions that I had. Because, I mean, after all the research that I had done, it was to remove all of the chicken ordinances that we had drafted up and get rid of that. The only questions that I did have were regarding the roosters. And our attorney did say, I do recommend putting in to put in a number, to put in some sort of restriction on number of chickens. That's his recommendation. We had talked about this and said, at this point, is that necessary? I mean, we can decide as a committee, do we want to put in a number? And I don't know, do we want to throw something out there? That's up to us, really. We can make that decision. We had talked about it, and I put a X out there of everything regarding chickens. The only thing, like I had just mentioned, was asking how to address that rooster thing. And I do think that there needs to be something in the ordinance for the roosters, because that is the biggest complaint that we have seen from the only complaints that we've had from the community that have come into the hall here for our meetings. And the phone calls that I received, the only complaints that I had was for the roosters. I have not received anything else. I've not seen anything else. There's nothing been brought to my attention for complaints. So I don't know how to proceed with that really at this time. So
the comment, and I saw Attorney Mauer's comment as well, was that we have that it was totally up to the board what the policy was, but he recommended that we have a limitation on the number and some requirements for fencing and housing for chickens, and then that we add a statement about the goats. He was fine with us deleting all of that information or detail about the goats, but that we have a clarification that goats would be allowed for invasive species control or as approved by the board. So do we want to add those points of clarification into the requirements under the ordinance? Should we talk about chickens first? Like the number, and I hear what you're saying, like what is the number? I don't know.
I honestly, I think at this point, I think just removing the chicken thing, I would be okay with removing the chicken thing at this point and just leaving it as is. And going with, do we actually get complaints? We have not seen any proof that we've had any complaints because, as Daryl had mentioned before, animal warden, he said, I have not tracked anything because we couldn't enforce anything. So there was no proof that we had, that was his comments in the meetings past, that there was he had no data for the complaints, except we had heard that there have been rooster complaints. And that is the biggest concern that I have, is the rooster complaints. But I also think capping it at like 20 chickens is not a bad idea. I do not agree myself with adding anything for fencing or that, or if we just simply put, you must have a fenced yard. I don't think adding something specific as in a specific housing unit or something like that. I would agree myself if we put in, if you have chickens within the village, you do have to have a fenced yard. I feel like that is fair, But I myself would.
Fenced yard or just a coop area that they're fenced into?
I'm okay with that, but I am not okay with adding myself. I wouldn't want to add something that we have to follow a specific guideline of you need to have it this high, this. I don't like that.
So,
They can't wander around the neighborhood?
Correct.
so would you be willing to draft a couple lines about that roosters are not allowed? Because that's,
Is that what we want to go with, totally not allowed? Or do we want to, those were the questions that I asked Paul specifically. But I think that we would need to be in agreement on that too. Because you said not allowed. I think that, I don't think having a rooster is a bad thing. I think if you abuse it, then it's a bad thing. If you have roosters, you can then reproduce and you can not have to buy chickens. That's not a bad thing. And if the research that I have done and the people that have come into the community here for the meetings, they do not crow until they're a maturity, and that's about 3 months. And if you have roosters, they can do them for fryer, they're like fryer chickens. You can then have them for, they butcher them for food. I mean, you can then do that. They don't crow until they're 3 months. That's another thing too. So.
I think if we wait until there's complaints, it's too late because then, as the warden said, he doesn't have anything to use. So I think we should have something very specific and brief about numbers and security, that they're, I don't care if the yard is fenced, but they're in a secure area or not wandering
I think that's fair.
off the
That is fair.
property, and that they have some sort of shelter, that there's a shelter available for them. We don't have to get into any detail about the shelter.
Yeah, when I think of a rooster, and I'm no chicken expert, obviously, if they're making a lot of noise, waking people up early in the morning, that would be a problem. So it's kind of like a nuisance animal, a nuisance dog. There needs to be, that if you have a rooster and people are complaining about it, well then you got to get rid of the rooster. But then I think when the people were here, somebody was saying that roosters, they can be abusive to the other hens. But who would have hens laying eggs and let a rooster be abusive to them?
That would be somebody not managing their own pet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the concern that we heard from neighbors was that they didn't want to have to be the ones that were tattling and enforcing the noise issue, and that having it clear about what they can expect, so that they weren't the ones who are having to say, you shouldn't have roosters, your roosters are allowed. So if there's some way that we can try and create a parameter around that doesn't require the neighbors to be the enforcement.
Well, right now, it's already covered under noise ordinance. They can call right now and it is covered under noise. That's already in our existing, it's already out there. You can call.
Can you tell me which section that is? Because one of
Noise
the
ordinance
issues.
under animals, and I had it, and I already quoted it in a different one. I don't have my notes with me right now. but
I'll
I
try to
have
find it because that's one of the points that I would like to bring up, because as we mentioned earlier, if I call the animal control warden, there's going to be a large time frame. So if the rooster's crowing right now, by the time 45 minutes comes by, an hour comes by, the rooster might not be crowing at the time that the animal
Yes.
warden gets here. So
Yep.
my officers and I are going to be the ones that are probably going to be responding first to these types of things.
Yep.
So, to the point of, or to your point, and it's a good point. If we have a dog barking, a dog can be controlled by a collar, those types of things. I don't believe that they make a collar for a rooster to stop crowing. A dog can be controlled; it's a domesticated animal, those types of things. So, if we do get a complaint, our nuisance ordinance, as you mentioned, so
Yes.
there's the public nuisances affecting health. They're not well defined, and we have
You are correct.
We have a huge problem trying to define them.
You are correct.
As well as our noise ordinance, because our noise ordinance doesn't say you can't have music past 10 o'clock. It doesn't give hours of, except for construction noise. And so it is a subjective, what is noisy and what do people complain about? So if someone, and I guess, John, your comment was, well, if your rooster's crowing, you have to get rid of your rooster. Why? Who says so? There's nothing in the ordinance that says if your rooster crows 3 times, you have to get rid of it. So that's where a lot of this conversation needs to start to look for the enforcement side of it, because I can't enforce something that's not there, and if something's there but it's not enforceable, why do we have it? So when we're looking at this, and I realize this is still a draft, and there's a lot of moving parts, from a enforcement perspective, if we're talking about noise, if you're going to allow a rooster or X amount of roosters, and a neighbor complains, what then?
Chief, section 10.8 is where I'm reading the animal nuisance. I think this would
That's
be.
animal specific, and it talks about dogs only.
So you don't think it doesn't cover the chickens under our,
It does not.
so we'd have to add the other definitions that we have of animals in the new proposed ordinance to that.
Because if you read it, the second sentence says nuisances is defined as excessive, continuous, or untimely barking. It doesn't say crowing.
Would it be better for enforcement to add the crowing stuff to animal nuisances or to create it under a chicken section? Like, which is the best way for enforcement?
I mean, we would have to have something that would give definition. So, if it's barking or animal sounds, I mean, I don't know how you,
Yeah, it could be
what you would use, to
Barking,
try to put that.
what do roosters do? What do you call that? Not crowing.
Crowing.
But, okay, barking, crowing, et cetera, or.
So these are the questions that I did outline. I sent a 3-page email to the attorney asking specifically about these roosters and the noises, and that's what I was waiting for a response on, specific how to contain those items.
And that'll be helpful if the attorney responds to you, and then I once I see that, I can let you
Right.
know. Again, an attorney will tell you this is the legal language, and then I will try to help you adapt to, okay, so how can we actually put it in play on the enforcement side of it?
Right.
Because an animal owner will try to find, or any person that doesn't feel like they're in violation of the ordinance or the laws, and so I'm not going to point out just animal owners. 25 years on the job, people will try to find every loophole that they possibly can. So we have to be careful. Words matter. And so when you do finally get to that definition of what that noise is that we can enforce, and then if that's the case, then what is the outcome? Like if we have a barking dog complaint, yes, we can issue a citation for the barking dog or the noise, this nuisance violation, but then what will the courts do? Previously, we had municipal court judges that would not find anyone guilty of barking dogs because they just felt like it was a neighbor issue and not, an overall violation. So that was just going to be my point that I was going to bring up, and it kind of was timely that that's something that if we get to that, we have the animal nuisances and then we have the other nuisances, and unfortunately, they're sometimes hard to enforce.
So
I'll leave it there.
the definition that we have for animal does include birds, poultry, and other fowl. So I wonder, Barb, if maybe it would make sense to draft something around the nuisance and animal with the chicken noises, et cetera, and then have a specific thing for the attorney to react to.
There's noise, I mean, it's covered under noise nuisance, not even animal nuisance too.
Okay,
So,
let's
I
go
mean,
look at
it
that.
does go under that as well. So I had it all under, like, I don't know, what was this, June? Like, and it's not in my sent over here on this iPad either, but I'll pull it all back out. But I also think at this point, I'm ready just to call it, I don't care. Should we just say no roosters and just call it? And we can just say no roosters in the village of North Hudson, and I can draft up a very nice verbiage on chickens need to be contained to a shelter and not to wander the village.
They need to have a fenced area and a shelter.
That sounds great to me too.
So just a point of clarification on this: loud and unnecessary noise prohibited. No person shall make or assist in making any noise tending to unreasonably disturb the peace and quiet of persons in the vicinity thereof, unless the making and continuing of the same cannot be prevented and is necessary for the protection and preservation of property or health of. So
Yeah.
it talks about persons.
So it really belongs under the nuisance, under the animal
Animal.
control nuisance area, and we need to expand that to include
Yeah, that makes sense.
noise, other noises that animals make, other types of animals, and then we would be able to do that. And then add the language that he suggested about goats, and then for clarification, because this came up at previous meetings, his advice was that we could not have any language that the warden could just enter the home or the premises, that he had to have permission. And I think that's a good clarification, and I know that was a concern at the meeting, so.
I'll let you take that on. I'll take
Okay,
on the
sure.
chickens for the animal, for the noise and animal nuisance and the shelter. And I think, let's just go with no roosters, and then we won't, maybe we just go with no, or what do you guys think about no roosters?
I know there was somebody, one of our residents that was here back when we had those meetings, that felt strongly that roosters should be allowed.
They do help with production of eggs. They do tremendously help with that. I don't care, we're not a farming community, so that is not my biggest concern either. We are in city limits, so also we are doing a great service to allow chickens here. This is not a farming community. I'm okay with that, and I also don't want to listen to roosters either.
Yeah, I don't want to listen to roosters, but I think it's important that people have the right to have chickens, and
They can still have chickens.
They can raise their own eggs and all that kind of stuff.
No one will know there's a rooster if they're not disturbing, so I think it's appropriate to say no rooster.
Right.
And then have the noise part.
Yes.
And if you want to work on that, Barb, and then
Yes.
send it to me, and then I'll do the other
Yes.
suggestions that the attorney had, and then we
Yes.
might be able to wrap this up.
Let's
at
do
the
that.
next meeting
Absolutely.
and get it forwarded to the board.
Yep, I like it. Well, and that's the other thing, it still has to pass through there too, but
Yep.
I like it, let's just go with it.
Sounds good. So we'll keep that on for next month's agenda.
Yeah.
Any other conversation about amending ordinance chapter 10? All right. Item 8 on the agenda, speed limit on North 7th, discussion and possible action. So I asked that this be added to the agenda based on communication received by a resident requesting that signs were posted on North 7th, and that there was a consideration for reduction of speed based on the residents' observation that people were not safe walking or jogging, and people were actually not walking or jogging along those areas because cars were too fast, because in the winter it was icy and slippery. And this related to the curve from 7th Street to Riverside, Helen to Riverside around the bends. And I know the chief had talked to Public Works about doing some sand and salt in that area, but that the request was to consider signs and speed reduction. Chief, can you give us some guidance on what you think about this request and what we might consider?
I can definitely speak to it. I guess I was under the understanding it was going before the February meeting, so I apologize. The way I read that, it was not coming tonight. So I don't have a lot prepared other than in my 25 years here, and I think the resident in her email basically said that she can think of one crash that occurred and it was icy conditions. Without giving an opinion one way or the other, I guess part of the situation that we have is that individual drivers have to take responsibility for their own driving and the conditions, and if there's a crash, if there are people that are driving too fast past pedestrians, Riverside Drive has no sidewalks. And so they are walking on the street. So again, whether or not they're walking, and I think that the village president on multiple occasions when we start to get towards fall and winter, requests that people remember to wear very bright colors so that they're easily seen. And so I think there's some issues with responsibility of individual drivers. We have over the years received some complaints about driving activities, but with no license plates that have been provided. So it might be a description of a white car that drove by. That's very difficult for us to be able to do follow-up on. If I get a license plate, we will absolutely follow up with those drivers and have conversations without a witness that is willing to testify that the activities were just disorderly vehicle or, driving too close to a pedestrian or something that we can actually enforce. It's difficult. And I struggle with this request just because the fact that adding a sign probably is not going to change driving behavior. If we have a sign that says dangerous curve ahead, I think most people that drive on Riverside Drive or at that intersection live in those areas, and so they're not necessarily visiting and those types of things. And so and the other piece of it is she discussed in her email about speed. Again, if I put up a speed change at that particular intersection, I think her comment in the email was something to the effect of, if there's no sign there, people will be able to argue that they didn't know what the speed limit was. Well, we've got the same speed limit through most of the village, with the exception of 35 miles an hour on part of Cratley Lane North and between Summers and Cratley. Those are the only two places that we have 35 miles an hour. Otherwise, all residential streets in the village are 25 miles an hour. They are not posted. Not all of them are posted, and I would say only a few of them are actually posted in those areas that are kind of long stretch right-of-ways. So
Am
I
I,
could think of 4th Street North. I believe that there's one on Galahad Road North, but for the most part, they're not posted. So definitely signage can go up, but I don't know how much that's going to change behaviors. We do patrol that area, although her email says she's never seen a police officer when they've been out walking. I find that hard to believe. And it's a very difficult area to run radar because it's all residential. I mean, we can sit and park on the side of the street, but then again, I think the argument could be made that, of course, they're going to slow down. They saw a squad car. So we can definitely work with some of those things, but it's difficult for that one particular. I have not heard from any other residents, although she said that there's multiple people that have made these complaints, which again, if we could hear from more than just one resident, it would be helpful to see if there actually is more of a problem than there is perceived by this one resident. But again, it's one of those things where if it's the perception becomes reality, and if they've seen it enough times, I don't believe that she's lying. I think that she probably has had experiences where it's been a close call. The unfortunate part is that the individual drivers, especially if it's about the sliding or the icy conditions, Public Works does their best, and if it's something they need to have increased salting or sanding, in that area, that's definitely something we can consider. But it's hard from the police chief's perspective or the police department's perspective to sometimes fix that particular issue on the curve, because there's no law that says you can. I mean, the speed limit's 25. So to her point, I think she's trying to say is, well, maybe the speed limit should be different so that you're driving slower through the intersection, because if you took that intersection or that turn at 25 miles an hour, are you violating the law? Well, you may not be violating the speed, but you definitely have to make that in a controlled manner. So, there's some other things that could come into play there as well.
Too fast for conditions.
Yeah, and if it's icy, that would be the issue too.
am I not mistaken that the majority of residential roads in the state of Wisconsin are 25? I thought all residential roads are 25 unless posted different in Wisconsin.
It depends on the population,
Yes,
like
but-
the density.
Yeah,
So
like we're talking 25 miles an hour.
yeah, but a lot of people that do travel here from Minnesota, that a lot of their residential roads are 30 or 35. So
I know, I moved here from Minnesota, and the
Yeah.
very first thing you notice is it's 25. You notice right away. I mean, yeah, it's the very first thing you notice, so.
Do we have, Chief, roads that are posted slower than 25 other than school zones?
the only one would be Riverside Drive north, east of Helen Street North, because it's basically like one lane of traffic. So at the bottom of the Riverside Drive hill, after Helen Street, it turns to 15 because it's very narrow. There's not really any shoulder, if you will, and you can barely get one car on there, and you kind of have to pull over to the side to let a car coming the opposite direction, or one of you would have to pull over. So, but otherwise, it's 25 miles an hour. There's no other than the speed zone that you mentioned.
So the standard is, at this point, the speed reduction is made based on there not being two lanes, essentially, for cars to travel.
Right.
Because when we get requests like this, and this isn't the first request we've received or a first concern we've received about driving too fast or risks for pedestrians, and we're kind of been struggling with how do we address these kinds of things and have some sort of consistency. So do we have a way to actually have some guidance so that we know what to do when we get these kinds of concerns? And it sounds like that would be one in regards to speed reduction, besides schools, would be a single lane that traffic going both directions has to share.
Yeah, and I think the other area in the village that we have basically a 90-degree curve is at Wisconsin Street North and Galahad Road North. If you're going westbound on Wisconsin Street, it's a 90-degree to go north on Galahad, or vice versa, you're south on Galahad to turn east on Wisconsin Street North. We do have and don't quote me on this, but it's something to the effect of dangerous intersection ahead. There is no speed reduction. It just has that one sign that basically gives people notice that there is a different type of intersection or not a typical curve. That was requested by a number of the neighbors that live in East Bank, the 2 blocks of East Bank Court North, because they pull out of that their driveway or their road onto that, and they wanted to make sure that people were aware of it. And they have had people in the past that have come in too fast and slid into trees and slid off the roadway. Again, I didn't do it was all just from recollection. I can definitely run a report to see if if we have had other crashes at that particular intersection of 7th and Riverside. I was just referencing the fact that the particular resident that sent the email said that they had witnessed one crash.
So thank you, and I appreciate that this was amended, the agenda was amended, and so it would be hard to be aware of that change. And so I wonder if we should carry this over to next month, Chief, and give you time to get that data, see what that looks like. That makes sense?
Yeah, and I think also if there would be, maybe if you as the chair would like to reach out to that resident to see if, other than the email, if they wanted to come in and address the committee on that issue as well.
I can do that. And then do you have recommendations in general? Because like I said, this is not the first concern that's been brought about people driving too fast and being unsafe. How should citizens handle that?
Well, if they see something, please contact the police department. If they have a specific vehicle, like I said, a license plate is optimal because that at least gets us to a potential registered owner. It might not be the registered owner that's driving, but we had a lot of complaints, or let me rephrase. We had a number of complaints about the same vehicle on Woodcrest Drive North. One of the residents finally got a license plate. We found out it was the teenage child of the registered owner, and that problem went away because we talked to not only the parents but the child or the young driver, and that problem went away. So if we can get some specific information, I think the whole thing that a lot of times comes out is see something, say something. We like to amend it to see something specific, or see something specific. Say something with detail, because it gets us a lot further than, hey, a white car or a white SUV. Well, that's very difficult, even with some of the other technologies that we have to be able to show that particular vehicle was at that location. So those were some of the things. The other thing is, to your point, I don't know that we have a one solution fits all. So if somebody complains about an intersection being dangerous, we need to do some research on that. If somebody says they want a stop sign at an intersection that doesn't have a stop sign, we have to do some research to find out if there is some reason to have that. The state of Wisconsin is helpful, but these are municipal streets, and they are helpful when it comes to highways or major county roads, those types of things. So really, this committee and/or the board has to make some decisions, kind of on a case-by-case basis, on how those things can be solved. We obviously can run radar all day long in different locations, and when we're not there is usually when things happen. So just I guess to answer your question, I don't have a great recommendation other than if they have something they're concerned about, call us. It's much better than they talk to all their neighbors about it and we never hear about it, and then they're complaining about the police department doesn't do anything. I can't do anything about stuff that I don't know about. So
Would that be the non-emergency number, Chief?
It could be either the non-emergency dispatch or just our regular number of 386-8433.
Thank you.
Non-emergency dispatch is going to be 24 hours a day, so that might be just an easier contact, and that's 386-4701.
Super.
Chief?
386-4701. Thank you. All right, and we'll carry this over for the next meeting. And I want to recognize that our fire chief, Chief Spielman, has been able to arrive from his other conflicts. And I want to give you an opportunity, Chief, and also to let you know that the River Channel is here. This is the first recorded meeting. So there you go. There you go.
All right, in the agenda packet was our November, December totals for incidents. We're still compiling all our data for 2024. Our year-end report, our final report, will be coming out probably in February when we get that all collected. The village at the end of the year was one call short of the year before, at 57. So the calls are staying steady, if not going up just a little bit within the village, but nothing out of the ordinary. So I guess just look forward to our year-end annual report, and that'll have a lot more information on our yearly totals for everything department-wide.
Well, that sounds wonderful. Thank you. We will look forward to that next month. Super. Anything for the chief? Okay. We'll move on back into order to item number 9, Police Department staffing and coverage, discussion only.
So I am still one officer short. We have been short an officer since August of 2024. We are on our 3rd hiring process just because of the processes and the number of candidates or the quality of the candidates. We did interviews last Saturday. We interviewed 5 candidates. The team interviewed them in the morning, and then the police commission conducted their interviews in the afternoon. At the end of the police commission interviews, they pushed forward 3 candidates to the eligibility list for me to choose from. I have started one of the candidates into the background investigation portion. I actually met with the candidate this afternoon for 2.5 hours to do the background investigation interview, and then I'll start to do all the contacts and the research and to try to determine if that's going to be a good fit. If that is a good fit, it usually takes me about 3 weeks. Then I will offer a contingent offer of employment, which will be contingent on a drug screen, a medical screen, and a psychological screen. If all of those come back positive or thumbs up, or negative, I should say, for the drug screen, then we will offer a final offer of employment, which will give all of the information on the start date and those types of things. So my hope, if everything goes well, is that mid-February we will have a new hire. That will then put them into the FTO process, which is our field training officer process, which will take roughly 4 to 4.5 months to get them trained to be certified for solo patrol. So during those 4 to 4.5 months, they will be with a field training officer. So there'll be 2 officers in the squad that the public may see. Usually in that first stage, it's going to be the training officer driving and just going through all kinds of different orientation. And then as it transitions to step 2 and step 3, then the probationary officer typically starts to drive and responds more. So there's kind of a flow of FTO doing more of the casework, and then slowly it transitions. So at the end of step 3, the probationary officer is doing up to 100% of the calls for service. And then step 4 is when the field training officer is in plain clothes in the shadow phase, where they basically have to show us they can do the job without us there, even though we are there. And so that's my hope, is that 4.5 months after February, which I didn't figure out, but we're probably talking close to Pepperfest before we'll have a solo officer and be back to full strength.
That's promising.
It is.
Is the field training officers, are those North Hudson officers?
Yes, it's myself and Sergeant Hecht.
Okay, good. So all their training will be,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, there's one day that they usually do an 8-hour shift at dispatch. They do an 8-hour shift with one of the St. Croix County field training officers just to get a feel for if they have to respond to something outside of North Hudson. They can kind of get a feel where those locations might be, where they might be asked by the sheriff's department. And then, of course, we just in our process, we include Hudson in some of the, where you might have to go. But yes, they're trained by our officers.
Very good.
Well, that's a great report. Thank you. Anything else that we should be aware of, or any other questions from the committee? All right, thank you. And then the next item is item 10, Police Department Capital Equipment Planning, discussion only.
And because we are just brand new into the 2025, there was a number of items that the board had approved for purchase in '24 because of the dollars that were left over from not having an officer. And so a majority of those items have been ordered, delivered, and we're doing some installation, so I can do further reporting back on those. We did have one item, I guess it would have gone on for capital equipment for 2026, or potentially try to get it in 2025, that we had an anonymous donor that came forward and paid for the piece of equipment. So we have a piece of equipment called the WRAP, which is for restraining the combative people or a person in crisis, that all of my officers went through training on. We had gotten one of the units to use for training and just kind of to get a feel for it. It was a brand new unit, and so the anonymous donor, picked up the tab for that, and so we will be putting that into our toolbox, if you will. Moving forward, I'm just waiting to get some policy examples so we can add that to our use of force policy or our restraint policy. but it was very nice. It was a $1,575 piece of equipment that the donor wrote a check for. So we don't have to have that on our moving forward equipment planning, but we're very happy to be able to have that for protection of the public and the officers, and obviously someone in crisis as well. And I can bring that in at some future meeting if you're interested.
I would be interested.
Watch them wrap you up.
You could volunteer as well.
Demo? Yeah.
Sure. All right. Anything else on the capital equipment planning?
None for me.
All right, our future agenda items. So, Chief, are we ready to put the emergency operations plan back on the agenda?
Has the agreement been made with the city of Hudson related to
Sewer and
the water?
Well, that's a really good question.
Because that's what I'm waiting on.
Okay, so we probably won't know that till next month, so
Right.
probably not.
Yeah,
Probably
I
not
would,
in
yeah,
February.
I can't do anything until that
Yep,
whole
okay.
situation, because it's,
Yep.
a lot of the plan document has contacts for if something were to go wrong, and that's where I have to have the right person in that line item.
Yeah, and since our board meeting was not held this month,
Right.
we won't really have any information ourselves. So, yep, we will reconsider that. And so next meeting, then we would have the animal ordinance, where we'll hopefully be having a discussion and possible action on the updated version. We'll discuss the speed limit. The chief will have some time to put together any data for incidents along that area. And then our usual standing items. Is there anything else that you, either of the trustees would like added to the agenda for the next meeting?
I can't think, Mary.
All right. Well, then we will call this meeting adjourned at 6:17 PM. Thank you.